there's plenty of like websites and like services out there that connect founders and investors. But I think a problem with a lot of them is that, investors and like anyone else, I guess for that matter, like nothing feels better than being let in on a secret. When all of a sudden you open up the floodgates, whether it's on the investor side or the founder side, you lose that specialness, that high touch curation that I try to strive for at First Look.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the pleasure of speaking with my good friend, Brian Folmer. Born and raised in Cleveland, Brian has just recently boomeranged back to Cleveland after 6 years in New York City and starting his own company. Brian is the founder of FirstLook VC and DistroBox. He's a mentor at Techstars and A16Z, a managing partner of the FirstLook Syndicate, and a proud Ohio State alum. He previously led business development and strategic partnerships at XRC Labs, international operations at Victoria's Secret, and took his first startup through a technology startup accelerator in his hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. Through his work at FirstLook VC, he's come to believe that founders are the dreamers in action who drive innovation, push the world forward, and create the bedrock of our economy. And in practice, he's focused on helping those exact founders build exciting brands and realize their visions. FirstLook is dedicated to cutting the friction and red tape between founders and investors by sending innovative products from emerging high-growth consumer brands directly to early-stage investors via their subscription box. In our conversation today, we explore how by connecting these two groups in a new, efficient, and practical way, Brian can uncover far more promising brands than before and begin to rewrite the script on consumer investing. Please enjoy my conversation with Brian Folmer. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here. This is great.
It is good. Offline, you and I have been riffing over the last few months on Cleveland, on startups since you moved back to town. And I feel like today we can unpack a lot of the conversations that we've already had a bit. But I am excited to have you on to share your story because, for one, I think you're generally pretty funny, so I think you'll be. I think this will be good. But also, I've loved your passion for Cleveland and your optimism about the city and also we'll talk about yourself as an entrepreneur. But thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This is great. And yeah, I always wondered what you thought when Eric connected us like a year and a half ago, and you're like, who the hell's this guy like coming in hot back to Cleveland? But yeah, appreciate you having me on. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, maybe kind of round out your story a bit here, boomeranging back to Cleveland. Just share a little bit about your path and how we're on the podcast here today.
Yeah, definitely. So born and raised in Cleveland, went to Drexel Heights High School, and then like all good Ohio boys, went to Ohio State. After school, or after I graduated, that's when basically I kind of got the first taste of the startup world and the VC world. I was working at a startup accelerator here in Cleveland that unfortunately is no longer in existence, or at least the Cleveland office is not. I'm not sure if you remember Bizdom. It was yeah.
Well, when I moved to Cleveland, I originally was working in StartMart, which I think had acquired all the Bizdom assets, perhaps.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah, right there in Tower City.
Right in Tower City, yeah.
But yeah, while I was working there, and I just was like, this is exactly what I want to do with my life. Is just like be around founders, be in this investment community. And while I was working there, and I was like part of the the committee that screens a lot of our applications and started to get a feel for like what they were looking for. And I actually submitted an idea that I had been working on the side to get into the program. I'm not going to say like I knew the questions that they would be asking, but I had a general idea of, like what they care about. And ended up getting into the program, and I went from, employee to founder overnight. Unfortunately, that startup didn't work out. I was essentially trying to create a website that connected sports fans who have a certain team they love with bars that support a certain team. So they're traditionally
Oh
called
yeah,
backer bars. And Cleveland and the Cleveland Browns have one of the largest backer bar networks in the world.
for sure. I know
And
in New York, it's like
yeah,
it's like a destination.
yeah. And every city has these bars. Funny enough, Bill's Mafia has the largest network. And you can find Bill's bars in Japan. I found one down in Cancun a few
Oh
years
wow.
ago. Yeah, which was I loved popping in there because they had all the games on a Sunday. But yeah, tried to start this site, and this was before there was Wix or any of these websites that helped you build real quick. So took a bit of time to actually build the site, build the database behind it to make it run. And unfortunately, we just couldn't get enough traction to get to that next level and raise that next round. So had to shut that down. But once I got a taste of startup life, basically being your own boss, working with so many smart folks around you, I was like, I got to get back to this. Jumped into corporate retail for a bit, worked at Abercrombie's headquarters and then Victoria's Secret's headquarters down in Columbus. VS got me out to New York City, where I was at the office there. And then I jumped on board with a startup accelerator in New York called XRC Labs. And they invest primarily in retail tech, consumer marketplaces, and then consumer brands.
Yeah.
And yeah, while I was working there, essentially came up with the idea for FirstLook, eventually started it. And then it was always my dream to move back to Cleveland because, being here in the startup community when I was at Bizdom and building backerbar.com, I was like, I got to get back to Cleveland and like put basically Cleveland on the map when it comes to like startups and investing. And I always knew I wanted to move home just because, this is where I grew up. This is where I want to start a family. It's where my family and friends are already at. So basically just being a diehard Clevelander, I was like, I knew I had to come back eventually. But I needed to, build a little bit of a track record, build some connections in New York. And then once I had that, it'd be the right time to move back.
So having ultimately done that, we can talk about FirstLook and the impetus for all that. But before we even get there, what was it about the consumer space that kind of drew your attention, given kind of the like breadth of things that are in the startup world? What is it about consumer that resonates?
I mean, part of it was just working at XRC Labs and their heavy focus on consumer. So, I immediately started getting experience in that space. But, and maybe if I worked at a tech accelerator, it might have been a different story. But I just love consumer because there's a lot of psychology that goes into why people gravitate towards one product or another. In tech, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I feel it's a bit more straightforward in like this tool solves this problem for me. And I'm just going to arguably use the best tool there is out there to solve whatever I'm doing, whether it's on a computer or whatnot. With consumer though, it's way more unpredictability when it comes to like why people buy this brand over another. Sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's because, a celebrity is behind this brand and I admire that celebrity. And sometimes it's just plain old the product's great and I'm going to drive an extra distance or, go online and order it, even though it might be a little bit more for shipping because I just love the taste of it. So yes, I just find that the psychology behind consumer brands is far more interesting compared to tech. But I could be wrong. I don't know enough about tech to have a solid answer there. I just love the psychology side of things for consumer.
Yeah, no, I think that checks out because I don't know. Ultimately, on the tech or air quote software side of things, at the end of the day, it's still like people behind the machines, doing the stuff. So you can't like you're still working with people, and when you're working with people, the psychology comes into play. But I think there is this like unpredictability and real intrigue around like why certain brands end up taking off when others wouldn't, and it feels hard in the moment to like try and gauge why that might be one brand over another, how it resonates in the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of wild because I'll see some brands that are like, this product's unbelievable, like, and all of a sudden they like barely get out of the gates and then they just die, and you're like, how the hell did this not turn into a smash hit? And there's a lot of other things that kind of come into play there. And then there'll be brands that like arguably, I don't know, either don't taste that great or work that well. And like they end up like murdering it. And you're like, wow, I did not see this coming, but you did something right. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
I remember first being made aware of the power of brands, I think in college when I feel like over the course of a year, Canada Goose like just blew up in a way. And I was like, there are a lot of warm jackets out there. Well, why is this particular brand blowing up in the way that it is? And it I don't know that I've ever understood it, but I think that was when I first became very acutely aware that like there's weird psychology going on.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because there's a lot of brands that like to tout that they have this large community behind them, and that's what's a big driving force of why they're growing or why they'll continue to grow. But unfortunately, a lot of founders mistake a community with an audience. So one of the things I always like to say is a community is what happens when the brand leaves the room. So essentially, if the brand's not there driving the conversation, are those people still talking to each other and talking about your brand? And if they're not, then you just have an audience. If they are still talking about you, that's good. You do have a community. And then there's basically two types of communities. There's communities where, like, for example, one of the brands I worked with, Belly Welly, they have these kind of brownie bites that are designed for people that have IBS. And like they chat with each other a lot because IBS is, there's a lot of issues with that. And they like to figure out, what's the best time to eat or what to eat. But then there's the community side of products where buying a certain product as a consumer, I want other people to think of me in a certain light where, and I always tell it's a great place where if you have a product where people want to leave it out on their countertop, on their table, because, when you invite your friends over for like a dinner party or whatever, you kind of want your friends to see like, oh, wow, you buy that product or you have, you use that. And like, yeah, because I'm I'm either a smart consumer or a savvy consumer. I care about my health. I don't know if flexing is the right word, but you certainly want to signal to other people that I am a buyer of this product because I like what it stands for. So it's almost in some respects a silent community where maybe they're not directly talking about it when their friends come over for a dinner date, but maybe they'll see the product like, oh, you buy that? How do you like it? And like, then they start talking about it. So it's interesting, the community side of things. And like, yeah, again, back in the psychology, what drives everything.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the indulgence of that detour, but I think it might be helpful at this point to understand, FirstLook, and maybe just give us a little bit of an overview of what it is. And I don't know, as you were, coming out of that accelerator work, how you were thinking about what you wanted to do next and how it, kind of took the form of FirstLook when it was starting.
So high level, FirstLook is pretty fun concept. Each month I take about 7, sometimes 8 brands, pop their samples in a box, send those boxes out to a bunch of early stage investors. They get to try everything. I create a data room for the brands so the investors can learn about them, see their story, their traction, their passion behind what they're doing. And most importantly, they get to look through their pitch decks. And then afterwards, the investors fill out a short form where they're, for the most part, just picking the brands they want to connect with. And then once I get those picks, I loop everybody together in an email and let them take it away from there. So the best way I like to sum up FirstLook is we're Shark Tank in a box. So you got to have a good punchline. I feel like that helps with connecting dots. But yeah, the idea came from, so when I was working at XRC Labs, we would always have brands would send us sample product to our office, cases of whatever drink or, whatever product. And half the time we weren't even talking to those brands. So I was thinking, like, all right, if they're sending us product and we're not even talking to them yet, and we're just an accelerator, we're not even a straightforward like VC firm, they got to be sending product to everyone else out there, which, it gets expensive sending product all over the place. And it's just a hassle to like find investors that would be interested in what you're building. So it just kind of hit me one day. I was bike riding near Battery Park. I remember the exact moment and the exact spot I was in that like it hit me. I was like, there should just be a box that curates the best of the best brands and helps turn that one-to-one grind of finding investors and sending them product, turning it into a one-to-many type situation. Yeah, couldn't stop thinking about it. Ran it by a few, investors friends I had made in the community, and for the most part, everyone loved it. The business model was still up for debate at that point, but I got a lot of great feedback. And then finally, in the fall of 2019, decided to go full time on it. Here we are today.
So it was a true epiphany, spur of the moment inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was the exercising part that got the creative juices flowing, but I mean, it helped too to like being in that space because I always knew I wanted to start another company again. And I figured, all right, if I don't have an idea just yet, the best thing I can do is at least work at a place where there are other founders, there's ideas floating around, there's, just learning everything there is to learn about starting a company before you even have an idea. And yeah, working there, I kind of saw the problem firsthand of what founders were dealing with. And then once the idea came to me, I'm like, this is it. I'm going for it.
If that was the challenge for founders, trying to get attention, get distribution, access to investors, what did the status quo feel like from the investor side of the coin?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. The spectrum of investors, well, first and foremost, investors always want to see more deals. It's largely a numbers game to try to figure out who's going to have the best chance of being a winning investment. Now, the appetite for investors of whether they want to pay for a FirstLook membership, that is a funny and long list of conversations. Some investors have, no desire, like I would never pay for something like this. And I even had some investors say like, oh, you should charge the brands more and like cover our side of things. So it's free for us. I'm like, probably not a good look since you're the one that has all the money and the founders are the ones that are broke, but appreciate the feedback. And then there are investors who are like, Brian, like $99 a month, like this is nothing. Like you're arguably like undercharging for the value and service that you provide. So it's been interesting. Is you can't build something that's for everybody. You got to find those people that it does resonate with. And I think we're doing a great job at that. But it is funny and even when I have this conversation with investors who are, proponents of FirstLook, man, some of the things they say about the investors when I tell them that like, oh yeah, some people just don't like it. Like they like dog on them. Like any investor that thinks this is too expensive, they shouldn't be investing. I'm like, I agree, but unfortunately, there's people out there that could differ. So the investor side is interesting, but at the end of the day, more deal flow is always a great thing. And if you can try the product out before you even jump on a conversation, it saves time because at the early stage of investing, and especially for angels, VCs not as much, but regardless, it's hard to invest in a product that you don't genuinely like yourself. I have some investors who are like, a few I've come across are like, Brian, I really actually couldn't care what it tastes like or, how this works. If they're making money, I'm in. But that's the minority. I would say 95% of investors do follow this thesis where I have to at least like the product before I invest. And if I don't like it, I'm out.
With that, what does the first box look like? How do you take this idea and piece it together in reality?
So this is a wild story. So started going full time in fall 2019. Stupidly filed my incorporation papers in November, not realizing I have to pay taxes now, even though I haven't even launched anything. And then it was on Tuesday, March 10th, I did my first LinkedIn post of like, hey everybody, like come check out this new company I'm starting. Finally finished building the site out. And 2 days later, COVID was officially like here. It was in New York. There was like, I'll remember it perfectly. It was like, there was runs on the grocery stores. I remember being a part of it. And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? Like, literally 2 days after I launched my company, a global pandemic kicks in. And it was tough at first because I don't know if you remember, but like the first like month or so, if you talked about anything except COVID and like safety, people would look at you like you're like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, I'm trying to like launch my brand here, like build it, like get the word out. And like, you say something about your business or whatever, especially, trying to like promote your business. And people would be like, hey, dummy, read the room. Like we're in a global pandemic. And I was like, all right, well, I don't know what you mean to do. Like I got to keep moving forward here. Finally, after that settled down, which I think it was the Burger King commercial. They were the first company that I saw that like actually used COVID as a means to keep pushing their business forward. Because they had a commercial on there.
What was that commercial?
It was for their drive-thrus and how their drive-thrus were all, everything's like sanitized and there's a handoff that's like really easy and you don't have to be nervous about going through a drive-thrus. That was the first company I saw that like said, all right, COVID's here. We have to keep moving forward. So we're going to like not leverage COVID to make more money, but we're going to acknowledge that this is here, and but we need to keep, I don't know, existing, I guess. Yeah. So once that, people kind of started settling into it a little bit, and I went home to Cleveland for about 2 months. I remember leaving New York. I'm like, oh, I'll be back here in like 2 weeks. This will blow over. No. So it was kind of nice because it was like I was heads down on the business, no distractions, could just keep cranking away. Was starting to build the investor list, starting to find the brands for the first box. And then I moved back to New York June 1st. My apartment was literally nothing happened in there except just collecting dust. And yeah, started basically prepping the first boxes. We had 10 investors that, some of them I knew from just working in the space, and then some of them were new, and was able to grab 6 brands and basically pitch them on like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. You could be a friend and help me out and let me do this. And shipped the first boxes in like late June and haven't looked back since. But it was interesting because I'll never say that I'm happy COVID happened, but I also can't complain too much because when everything shut down, all of a sudden, all those, networking events and fireside chats and all those opportunities that founders and investors would normally bump into each other, after work, they all came to a halt. So all of a sudden, FirstLook became this like great tool to bridge that gap and bring founders and investors together. And I think that was like a big part of like how we got that initial traction, was because no one was meeting up with each other, and our box is all about connecting, two sides together. So I'll take it. It worked out for me.
Yeah. The boxes get delivered. The investors, the venture capitalists, they're checking out, the different offerings. What does it look like for, an investment to be made? I guess like what are the outcomes ideally that you're looking for? And maybe just kind of take us through from start to finish here, a brand looking to break into FirstLook and get that access to distribution to, investors on the other side of it. How are those relationships facilitated, and maybe, how is that different, or, how is that kind of interaction relative to what everyone's used to today?
So as far as the brands go, I try to keep it simple. They either sign up on the website, or I'll bump into someone somewhere, or I'll just get intros from, other founders and investors, whoever. I jump on a call with everyone and kind of go through my due diligence with them to make sure that everything checks out right. I don't like to say that I'm here to pick the winners. I think my job is more about trying to figure out who has the least chance of winning. Because like I think there's still a lot of luck that comes into VC. So I'm not the one to say like, oh yeah, this is an automatic like winner, like you should put your money into it. But there are some folks that certainly aren't as far along, or maybe they're just not as buttoned up as I think investors are wanting to see. But at the early stage, at the end of the day, these are all super early companies. Like what it comes down to is betting on the founder. You're betting on the right person that'll figure out, the metrics and the cohort analysis and LTV and CAC and all those things. The best founders figure that all out, as time goes on. So I think my real job is just trying to figure out more about the person behind the brand, and not as much, or not maybe critiquing as hard the brand itself as it is right now. But once I give them the green light, I pick, I said, about 7 or 8 brands each month. They send me the product. I create a data room for them that has all their information in it. They go in the box, which usually ships out around the 25th of each month. The investors get it and get to try everything, learn about the brands. And then once the investors let me know who they want to connect with, it's like any normal intro from there. I just put them an email and tell them connect and conquer. Thanks. And they're on their way. I don't butt into the conversation or even continue that with the founder and investor. Once they're connected, I let them go from there. And, if they say the right things to the investor, that what the investor is looking for as far as an investment opportunity, everything happens between them.
So from your perspective, the most successful box is one where, investments are made, brands get developed, capital is deployed, right? Like that's what the outcome is intended to be.
Yeah, no, 100% right. Our North Star metric is funds raised for brands. So I always, it's a funny line I have to toe between picking brands that I think are going to receive an investment and just picking brands that I think are just cool as hell. And this should exist in the world. Like,
Yeah.
this is great. I want them to do well. So I always just try to pick like, I don't know, the coolest brands and hope the investors kind of see the same thing that I'm seeing. But yeah, landing an investment is best case scenario. Unfortunately, or statistically, they're not going to raise. First Look's not a silver bullet. I can't make the investors write checks. Can't change the dynamics of just how hard it is to fundraise in general. I'm not going to say First Look is like a boom or bust business, because what I've tried to do from day one is try to provide a lot of value for the founders beyond just fundraising or beyond just landing a check. So with each of them, I sit down and I do a full pitch deck review, whether it takes 1 hour, 5 hours, whatever it takes. Try to share with them everything I know about, what investors like to see in these decks and like how to think about their business. We have like a WhatsApp community for sampling opportunities that I add them to. And there's a handful of other things that just, other things that provide value, because yeah, landing a check is hard. Like that doesn't go away. Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job of adding that value. So even if they don't raise, they still feel like this was a good opportunity to go through.
Is that where the syndicate work that you started to do came into play, was to kind of round out that opportunity, or how did that come in, and is it related to First Look?
That came about in a different way. So, our model right now is the investors have a membership to First Look, which is $99 a month. And then the brands pay anywhere from $3.99 to $8.99, depending on their last 12 months revenue. I try to make it as cheap as possible for everyone. I'm certainly not getting rich off this by any means, making just enough to cover my bills. But one thing I never wanted to do was do any sort of success fee, or the brands have to give me advisory shares by going through. My theory was that if I made it too expensive for the brands, I would scare away the best of the best. When you think about like the VC landscape, there's always that, like, most brands get a lot of no's, a lot of investors pass, but there's always that like top 1 or 2% where like all of a sudden the tables turn and like investors are like trying to claw their way into rounds. And those are, that's now TBD on whether those hot deals actually outperform the mean. I have yet to find data on that, but nonetheless, I never wanted to make First Look too expensive and not have an opportunity where those founders could jump in. Because otherwise, if I talk to them and I'd be like, hey, you should jump in the box and it costs X amount of money, or, or I'm going to take, success fee, they would be like, Brian, like, we have investors like begging to be in our round. Like, we don't need to go through your boxes per se. Like, we're all right. And if I charge a success fee, they would have certainly never considered it. So I try to make it as cheap as possible for them. But because I don't take any success fee or equity or anything, I started the First Look Syndicate, which that's our way of, kind of basically separating church and state, where if we do like a brand, we'll pull together investors into an SPV and invest that way. That's my like only way of essentially getting a lottery ticket to some of these brands. But I definitely, I always want to make it as cheap as possible for the brands, because they don't got a lot of money. At the end of the day, like, right, they're trying to raise more. That's why they're out there. And the nice thing about the syndicate is it's like, I can start building a track record for myself as far as like, am I picking the right brands that are doing well? We'll see.
What are some of your favorite brands that have come through that you've helped establish those relationships or invested in?
Oh man, I mean, we've had 225 brands now go through, and some of them are hella neat, hella cool. We'll see if they can scale or if this is something that can have a venture exit of some sort. And then some things are a little bit more simple, but like it's just something that everyone can enjoy, so they might become big. One of the first companies that I thought was really cool was a company called Tropical. And they essentially took discarded coconut husks and compressed them down into charcoals for your grill. And they actually burned hotter and longer than a typical charcoal. And they were, upcycling what was traditionally going to be thrown out. And I was like, damn, like this is hella cool. So I thought they were fun. I had a company called Bauza recently go through, which Mark Cuban's an investor in, and they essentially take those little Asian baos that you'd see at a Chinese restaurant, and they put pizza, like cheese and pepperoni in them instead, and they're selling like crazy. And it's just one of those like, oh yeah, like this is what seems to be a simple concept of like pizza everyone loves, baos everyone loves, like let's just combine the two. Another cool company And I gotta give shout outs to the Cleveland brands I've worked with. Every key, they're super neat in that, yeah, the product, this little key fob kind of thing just unlocks whether it's your computer or your car or whatever it is, anything
Oh yeah, yeah.
electronically. I think
We
what they're
had
doing
we
is
had
super
Chris
cool.
on. I
Oh,
didn't realize
nice.
they had gone through FirstLook.
Yeah. Yeah, they did well. It's a little harder with tech companies because their cogs are a little bit higher. So I always want to be real conscious of like giving up their product essentially to the investors. But yeah, they did really well. And there's another cool company here in Cleveland called Peaceful Fruits. I don't know if you know Evan. He'd be good for
Mm.
your podcast. And he was, I think he went through Venture for America as
Oh
well.
wow,
Yeah. But he is essentially, his company is like, remember when we were little kids, there was like fruit by the foot and fruit roll ups and like
of
gushers
course.
and all those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, now that we're older, we realize like those are just like basically like sugar gummy. I don't know what the hell they were made of, but his company is essentially redoing a lot of those things, but actually using like healthier ingredients and making fun shapes and fruit tape and but it's good for you, and it's actually just dried fruit, and they have a proprietary process of kind of how to get it to the shape and in the consistency of what we remember as kids, but it's actually good for you. So I could talk all day about all the like. There's a lot of interesting brands, but interesting doesn't always necessarily translate into is this venture backable or is this going to have a venture outcome that investors are looking for.
Right. Well, we had talked a little bit about, the unpredictability of, how the brands will evolve and the psychology behind it. But like with that, are there predictive things that you have seen, coming in, interviewing hundreds, potentially thousands of founders before or, through FirstLook? Is there anything like outside of, is this founder the right person for the job that can help you gauge, in retrospect, which of the ones have made it through?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, first and foremost, I think founders have to have a passion for what they're doing. There's a lot of, or, I mean, I don't say a lot, but a good amount of founders out there that will just start a company because they see an opportunity to make money, which is great. We all have money. But when times get dark and it gets tough, a lot of times those founders give up because they're not passionate about what they're doing.
Hmm.
So I really like it when a founder has like a personal experience or a reason of why they're doing it, because that's what's going to get them through those hard times. After that, a little bit of wild west, but obviously you have to have a great product, a beautiful brand, and then for a lot of product, it's like distribution. How do you like be at the right place at the right time? And some categories are more straightforward than others. But then in the day, if you're product solving an actual pain point that consumers will pay for, and you have brand equity. There's a lot of activity now with celebrities starting brands, which that's very hotly debated right now. Of like, do celebrities, are they? I'm not saying necessary, but like, are they a way to like expedite growth for a company? And there are certainly winners out there. Where I mean, right now Prime Hydration's murdering it, but
Or like I just saw the Mr. Beast stuff. I mean, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
yeah. But for every one of these like success stories you hear where a celebrity came on board, there is a graveyard of brands where a celebrity got involved and it went nowhere. So it really comes down to, and this is probably true to a degree in tech, but when you build a big business, at the end of the day, the product just becomes a widget. I hate to say it because I know founders work hard on these things. And the real magic is actually in your growth story. The guerrilla marketing tactics, the strategy that when it came in, for early days of expansion, getting really granular with where you're gonna, set up shop or what markets you're gonna go after first. Which, I was talking to a chocolate brand that they basically put caffeine in their little chocolate bites. And I challenged him. I was like, which investment bank in New York? He's based in New York City, actually a Cleveland guy. I was like, which bank in New York City drinks the most coffee per capita or like per employee? That's the exact bank you should be trying to, or office space that you should be trying to get into first. Because like that's the place where you're most likely going to have people that are susceptible to what you're selling. So whether it's JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, whatever it is, like figure out who sucks down the most coffee and then start with there. And then, it's nice because when you get really methodical in your growth strategies, it tells investors, wow, this founder has really done their homework. And then they feel a lot better about giving you money because they know it's going to a good home. And you actually like think about these really careful things about how you're going to grow the brand. So long story short, there are certainly things that signal that you're on the right path and you're probably, hopefully going to do well. But at the end of the day, like there's also still a lot of luck in some of these things.
How do you think about that for yourself? The growth strategies and plans for FirstLook and kind of over the coming months, years, what is the kind of higher level impact that you're hoping to achieve here?
So I'm bootstrapped, and I'll probably always say bootstrapped, which means we grow a little bit slower than everyone else is VC backed. And I'm okay with that. There's pros and cons to both sides. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, I'm in the business of helping people raise VC dollars, so certainly a proponent of it. I've always tried to go with a boutique style company. There's plenty of like websites and like services out there that connect founders and investors. But I think a problem with a lot of them is that, investors and like anyone else, I guess for that matter, like nothing feels better than being let in on a secret. When all of a sudden you open up the floodgates, whether it's on the investor side or the founder side, you lose that specialness, that high touch curation that I try to strive for with FirstLook, which I only pick 7 brands per month to go in out of the hundreds of brands that apply. Yeah, I keep the investor count low on the other side because I want them to make sure that they're feeling like they're seeing deals and opportunities before their peers are, before their competition is. So yeah, keeping things much more boutique rather than like, all right, are we going to scale this to a massive level is certainly my goal. As far as getting there's a quote out there, I forget what it is, but essentially it's like hard times or like basically being broke breeds creativity because you have to. I always think about like, a lot of musicians have their breakout songs when they were at their like not lowest point, but basically brokest point where like they're sleeping on a friend's couch. They had no money to go out to the bars and nothing. All they could do is sit and like make music. And that's what ended up, making their first smash hit that helped them kind of get propelled. Same thing with founders, because I don't have like, not swimming in the money, like I had to be really creative. And one strategy I love to use is creating, as far as marketing goes, creating things that are either self-fulfilling or basically super cheap to distribute, where it's not like there's not much of like, they provide value for people. So for example, I created a public Gmail calendar that has all the events and expos and conferences, pitch competitions, everything for the consumer brand world. Mm-hmm. And I would make it for myself at first because I'm like, oh, I want to know when all these events are. And I just, I was like, wait a minute, I should just share this with like everyone so that everyone can, see when things are coming or when there's deadlines or, whatever it is. And so I ended up just sharing it with, the consumer VC landscape, and everyone loves it. And the nice thing now is like, FirstLook is on, at least 1,800 to 2,000 people's calendars, which is arguably some of the most precious real estate on our laptops. Oh, wow. And it costs me nothing except my time, which is to make sure I find these events and add them in and have, the right dates and everything. But once it's up and going, and now, I have a little submit button where it's like, hey, you have an event that you want to have on here, like submit it here. And now that it's up and running, I don't have to worry about like constantly finding new events. People just submit them to me and I just add them, if they qualify. And it's great. Costs me nothing except my time. And now it's just self-sustaining where people just submit events for me. And I'm doing another one right now where we'll see if this works out, but a newsletter called Founder Horror Stories. I might change the name to Founder War Stories. I'm still split on that. But just that, all the founders, I'm sure you have plenty of scars from your days as a founder. Like, these moments, at least the consumer will, their stories are like, oh my God, like, all the ingredients were supposed to arrive at our manufacturer and all of a sudden like one ingredient couldn't make it. So we had to rent a car and drive from Kansas City to Seattle and go through a snowstorm and we almost crashed and blah, blah. Like they all have these wild stories of how they had to, persevere. And I want to create a newsletter for founders to share those stories. And then hopefully once it gets jump started, founders just keep submitting their stories. And I literally will just copy and paste them into the newsletter and send it out once a week. And like minimal lift on my part, becomes self-sustaining as it grows. Founders submit their own stories, so I don't have to do much work on it. And yeah, it'll be hopefully a great marketing tool for FirstLook where costs me nothing and becomes self-sustaining.
I personally love that idea. I think,
It's interesting.
yeah. Well, because it's like it mirrors the personal social media landscape, where I think from the outside it always looks very good and polished from the startup perspective, but like obviously there's a lot of stuff going very wrong all the time, and it's constantly putting out fires. And I think it's, I don't know, part of the fun of this podcast is like hearing what people have to actually do to to make it
Oh
work.
yeah, it's interesting you say that because one of the questions I like to ask founders when I'm interviewing them and doing due diligence is what keeps you up at night, in terms of the
Oh yeah.
business. And because everyone's really pretty good at like painting a pretty story of like, oh, we're just murdering it over here, like let's do this. But when you ask that question of what keeps you up at night, that's when you start getting into like what they're nervous about or what is top of mind for them, and you kind of start getting those deeper stories. So, but yeah, we all have those war stories. You just sometimes don't hear about them until it's like a personal conversation. But you got to pry them out.
I'm prime out. Well, I'll play it back to you. It's too easy now. What keeps you up at night?
Oh man, I'm always just wondering if I'm doing the right thing. So a very deep answer to this question is anytime there's a tool that comes out that makes fundraising easier for a founder, the old guard, which is all the traditional VCs out there, they usually hate on it because it's competition for them and it changes the dynamics of how they operate or like how hard they have to work for what they're doing. So easy example of this is when those crowdfunding campaigns came out, like Republic, for example. A lot of investors out there were like, oh, if you have to raise on Republic, you must not be a good brand. Like, because if you would just raise the traditional route. And so, from the day one, I've always tried to keep it conscious of that. And Republic now, they're great. Like,
Oh, an
everyone
incredible
loves
company,
them.
yeah.
Yeah, and like there's actually a lot of investors now that the tide's turned on them, where now investors are like, you should raise from us, and you should do a crowdfunding campaign because you have all these fans, and just help support your brand, and like it's a great move. And now like they're embracing it. So at first look, as is always like, all right, I'm a tool that helps founders, potentially raise rounds faster. Which then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, if you have to go through first look, are you not that great of a brand? The answer is no, obviously. But I've always been conscious about that, and that's why I've always tried my best to like make sure I get absolutely great brands so that I can nix immediately this thought that like, oh, if you had to rely on First Look, you must not be that great. Like, obviously not the case. And like, yeah, that's always been a worry of mine from the start. And like, we're far enough into the market now. I mean, we're almost over 3 years in the market that like we're past that. But it was something I was worried about in the beginning. And it's like a very real thing, like, because so much of the VC game is about signaling and optics and like,
yeah, and exclusivity, and it's like on the opposite end of that spectrum is access and exclusivity.
yeah. I mean, it still keeps me up to a degree tonight, or each night, but that was like a huge thing in the early days, was being very careful about that.
What comes next? What what has you most excited looking forward over the next year when you think about the business?
Well, I'd love to get to a point where, because there's a lot of investors I meet where their focus is too specific for First Look right now, because the box is agnostic. It has food, bev, beauty, wellness, home goods, pets, every category you imagine. And because of that, I have to find investors that are agnostic when it comes to CPG investing. And then there's also investors, that are by stage. Like I only do pre-seed and seed, or I only do Series A and above, whatever it is. So I'd love to get to a point where I can start segmenting the boxes out into more specific categories and by stage. And our deal flow is strong right now, where I think we have great brands every month, but I'm not sure if it's strong enough yet to be able to consistently put out, 2-3 boxes each month and feel good about, am I providing value to the investors? Because the moment, they get enough brands that are just like not that great or not that appealing, they're going to ask themselves like, why am I subscribed to First Look? Like, this is a waste. Yeah, I'd love to, get to that point where our deal flow is strong enough where we can have all these boxes going and all the brands are great and I feel good about them. So that's long term. Nice thing is we built essentially a proprietary deal flow engine, not just deal flow in general, but like anytime you can build an audience, it gives you optionality with like what you can do next. So I'll be adding in some like additional revenue streams this year, like little things. I'm not going to be retiring on a beach anytime soon. yeah, now that we have like, brands that are finding us and there's extra ways to support them beyond just fundraising, hopefully I can capitalize on some of those things.
Yeah, well, that was something I wanted to ask about because at the onset, you mentioned that it's really just about the one time facilitation, but if how your relationship with the brands can evolve over time, outside of this kind of one time transaction.
Yeah, I call it splash. One big
Splash.
splash in the box. I mean, with all the brands, because I mean, it was June in 2020 is when I started sending the first boxes out, and like some of those brands, they've already raised like one or two rounds since then. So any brand that I work with, I always say like, you're always happy to like, you're always welcome to jump in the boxes whenever you'd like for your next rounds. So I try to support them basically through their whole, growth path and like different rounds that they're raising. But yeah, I got a few things cooking as far as like how to help brands. I'm working on something right now with helping brands get onto the shelves of like DSD and like independent distributors, which I think is super exciting. Because the way I think about it is like, all right, I have the attention of these brands. They trust that, I do the work, or at least I work hard for them. And I've never been the kind of guy that like, there's always people that try to hit, do partnerships with FirstLook and like, I don't know, those never work out. And I've always been, this came from working on my accelerator days. Founders like hate it when they become like a horse and pony show. And so I've never, I've just always having the founders respect. I've never tried to like dangle things in front of them that help me make more money, even though I don't, I might not know how well this like tech solution or whatever, Shopify plugin or whatever it may be, like SMS service, whatever it is. Like I always try to be really careful with that. And I, if I ever do share things with them, which I do have like a bi-monthly kind of private email I send to all the founders with just cool things I'm seeing, but I never financially make money off them. It's just cool things that I see. And I think they respect that. Like I'm not a sellout essentially, even though it'd be great to make more money, but I rather have their respect. And so it's like, when you think of the biggest issues that these, consumer brands have is like, first is like, I need investor money to grow or to like get this going. And the second biggest thing is like, how do I get sales? And so, yeah, right now I'm working on something that basically solves for getting on shelves and getting in front of consumers and doing sales. So as long as that works out and then start building a track record with the syndicate, I would love someday to start a fund here in Cleveland that invests in consumer brands. And then we leverage FirstLook and this other company to actually help brands, succeed and basically just help put Cleveland on the map when it comes to startups, VC investing. That's the dream.
Yeah. It's a shared passion and enthusiasm for supporting founders that we have. So I love it. Love what you're doing.
Yeah. Cleveland's I love Cleveland. So everything I say is of course going to be biased, but Cleveland's great from, my goal since I moved back and this is like literally a decade or two long goal, is like to make Cleveland the next Austin. So I don't know if you follow, but Austin is quite the hotbed for consumer brand startups. Obviously, New York's New York, LA, and Bay Area, those will always be like big markets. But Austin is like arguably probably the third or fourth like hottest market for consumer brands. I'm not even sure why, to be honest with you. It just kind of like happened. But now look, Austin's getting super, pretty overcrowded. Traffic's bad. It's still a great city. Don't get me wrong. My goal is to make Cleveland the next Austin in terms of consumer brands. And my argument for that is that 60% of the U.S. population is within a 1 day's drive of Ohio, which translates to product can get delivered to 60% of the nation in 1 day. We got unlimited water, clean, fresh water. Awesome. We have a heavy manufacturing background, so there's a lot of infrastructure here for it. Yeah, and then, I love what Mayor Bibb's doing with the city, sort of just making it very like up and coming progressive. The only thing we need to get going here is like tying in the educational institutions, the universities and colleges to like help foster that environment. Because I would love for us to like, whether it's, Stanford like is such a great feeder system for the Bay Area. Carnegie Mellon does great with all things in Pittsburgh and like, autonomous driving and cars. Yeah, I'd love for Cleveland to like basically become, a city where all the resources are there, the talent, the pool is there, the money's there to build something amazing. I think we can do it.
I'm right there with you. We'll pull it together.
We can do it. We got it.
Well, very cool. I'll leave a greenfield, question for you here, given the kind of breadth of stuff that we've talked about. Are there any, parts to the First Look story to your story that you feel are particularly important that we haven't touched on yet?
I'm sure a lot of other founders, every founder probably deals with this, but like, yeah, there's just some days where I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or, yeah, am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? It can be stressful at times, but it's one of those things where like, I always try to find balance in that, like, I'm not like a surgeon where, if I don't do something right, someone dies. Like, I always try to remember, like, having fun, and it's not life or death situations here. And then I also think it's important to, like, when 6 o'clock or 6:30, whenever like hits, like, close the laptop, like, and be okay with the fact that, like, oh my God, I'm not putting in 24-hour, 8 days a week work, and like, oh, am I not gonna make it? Like, there's a lot of people that don't get a chance to maybe like pursue their dreams as much, or are doing things that, for a living that they don't like. So any day that, yeah, I always try to remind myself that, like, hey, I'm doing something that I enjoy, so can't be too hard on myself. But it's tough. I mean, it is with being a founder, like, there's always like that moment or those moments where you're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing enough? Like, it can be stressful.
Yeah. Startups, I feel, have a way of exacerbating the highs and lows to very, extremes, where it's very high and it's very low. And when you're trying to maintain balance, you can't let the highs get too high and the lows too lows, and you have to have fun along the way. And, that stuff matters a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's like time's always going to pass by anyway. So please try to do something that you enjoy.
Well, I'll throw our traditional closing question at you before we wrap up here, which I'm very curious what you're going to say, is for not your favorite thing in Cleveland, but for a hidden gem, something that, other folks should know about, but maybe they don't.
My food and restaurants are like weird picks. Like, I love Skyline Chili, which I know people are probably cringing at the sound of that. I do like Swenson's, unbelievable. And then I'm a huge proponent of Cozumel because I love Mexican food. As far as hidden gems go, though, man, the towpath in Brecksville in the metro parks, oh my God, it's like, especially in the summer, like, it's the most beautiful walk you'll ever have. And I'm actually not I'm not even crazy to say that, because Peloton bikes, they added the towpath as an option for people to bike on, like, you see it through the screen, but like, they realize it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. It's an option for, I guess there's people all over whoever has a Peloton.
I didn't realize that.
So yeah, that's my biggest hidden gem is going on a walk on the Brecksville, the towpath down in the metro parks. Absolutely beautiful.
That's fantastic. Maybe it's not going to be so hidden anymore.
Yeah, actually, no one should go there. It's real ugly and bad, because I don't want you guys getting real busy on the walkways there. So no, it's great.
Yeah, no, it is pretty special. Well, Brian, I really appreciate your time and coming on and sharing a little bit more about yourself and the work you're doing at FirstLook.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This is great. Obviously, big fan of the podcast. Big fan of everything you're doing for the city. Looking forward to next happy hour with you.
Yeah, I am as well. If people had anything that they wanted to follow up with you about, or maybe they want to get into the next box, what is the best way for them to do so?
You're always welcome to email me. I'm just at brian@firstlook.vc. Brian with an I spell it correctly. And then, obviously our socials just pretty much at FirstLook VC on across the board. But yeah, happy to chat with anyone, especially anyone in Cleveland. I'm even more excited to help you guys out, because when we build up our community, then it just makes everything better in the future. So yeah, always open to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Appreciate it, Jeffrey. We'll talk soon.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm, or find us on Twitter at podlayoftheland or at sternjefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.